Good morning, everyone. I'm recording this video tonight to be presented for you all on Friday, December 18th. And this morning, we're going to be looking at the story of the prodigal son, or at least the first part of the story of the prodigal son. I've decided to break it into two segments. Tonight, I'm going to talk about the younger son and the father, and then for Saturday morning, I will be talking about the older brother and the father and what's going on in those two very different dynamics. But here we have this story, and I'm going to paraphrase it for you first before I read it, and see if you recognize this story. And here we have the story of this son that comes to his father and wants his inheritance early, and the father acquiesces to him, surprisingly so, and gives him his portion, which would be a third of everything the father owns. He's the younger son. The older son gets 2/3. The younger son would get a third. So here you go, son. A third of all I own is yours. And the son quickly takes off to parts unknown, and he wastes that money and all kinds of extravagance and illicit behavior, not exactly behaving himself. And the next thing he knows, he's blown through his inheritance. And this happens to people that win the lottery. They blow through it. There's no what do I want to say? There's no self-control there. And so, boom, it's gone. And next thing he knows, he's out there feeding pigs. There's been a drought in the land, and he's feeding pigs. And suddenly he realizes, I can go ask my dad, and I can work as one of the slaves for my dad and stay in the slaves' quarters and all of this. And so he takes off to go see Pop, and he arrives at the big house where dad lives. Dad's a wealthy man, and he sees his dad seated there at the table, and he crawls on his hands and knees to his father and says, Father, please, I beg you, just allow me to work for you as a slave. And the father says, you disrespectful son, you go and stay in the slave quarters, and we will make you work doubly hard, because that's what you deserve for all of the disrespect and that you showed me, and all of the wanton living and wastefulness that you blew through all that inheritance. And the older son's going, yeah, Dad, give it to him. And what, you mean that's not right? Oh, no, I guess I'll just read it then. How about that? So let's listen to this. Here we are. We are in the 15th chapter of Luke, and we're going to look at verses 11 to 24. Earlier today, yesterday for you all, we talked about the parable of the lost sheep and the parable of the lost coin. And this is really an extension. These really four parables, because there's really two parables in the parable of the prodigal son, but people don't realize that. But these four parables really are one story about things being lost and finding them in the joy and all of that. So let's read this, 11 to 24, verses 11 to 24 in the 15th chapter of Luke's Gospel. Then Jesus said, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me. So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant land, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout the country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands. So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his slaves, Quickly, bring out a robe, and the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. He was found and they celebrate. Remember the joy that we had about the coin and the sheep? We still got that joy. Yeah, oh, wow. Isn't this great? But it goes deeper. This is, as many of you know that are from Woodlawn, this is my favorite parable in the whole Bible. This is why the 15th chapter of Luke is my favorite chapter in the entire Bible, is because of this parable. I love this parable. I don't think, and I've said this a million times, I will say it a million more. Probably that's an exaggeration, by the way. Probably only 1,000 times. Maybe not even that. Maybe a couple hundred. I don't know. But I say it repeatedly. I don't believe you can really understand God if you don't understand, if you don't look at this parable. If you eliminate this parable from your understanding of God, I don't think you truly understand God. I really don't. That's my understanding of God. It really hinges upon this parable. And it's a remarkable parable, because here the son did, as I said in my paraphrasing up front, did exactly that. He went to his dad, said, "Dad, give me my money up front." Disrespect, par excellence. No end to the disrespect here. "Dad, guess what? Your stuff's more important to me than you. I would be better off if you were dead and I had your stuff. So you're as good as dead to me, Dad." So Dad gives in. What's up with that? But he does. He gives in, and he accepts the insult and gives the kid his inheritance. And the kid goes and blows it. And this is much like God gives us this life. God gave us our very existence. And God gives us the breath in our lungs, all that we have, the blood in our veins, all of these things are gifts from God. And what do? We squander it in all kinds of wrong behavior. We do. We really do. But at any rate, so the son goes off and he finds himself working. He blows the money, of course, in bad behavior, which that's very much a parallel to the way we behave towards God, doing things that would be very un-Jewish, no doubt. And now he finds himself doing the very un-Jewish thing of being out there living and feeding the pigs. This is about as bad off as you can get for a little Jewish boy. This is bad. These unclean animals. And I wish I could eat the food that they're feeding the unclean animals. Guess what? That food's being fed those unclean animals just by in contact with the unclean animals is unclean. And so, of course, the son is unclean. And that plays in when the dad comes and finds him, too. But he realizes that I can go and ask my dad to accept me back. And he's not looking at it as coming back as a son, is he? He's coming back as a servant, a slave in the Greek. He's a slave. He's coming back as a slave. He's living in the slave quarters. Treat me like a slave. I'll dress like a slave. I will behave like a slave. But praise God, I'll actually have some food to eat, which I don't have here with these pigs. So he does this. But before he even gets all the way there, the dad has apparently been watching the horizon for his son, hoping and praying, no doubt, that his son is going to, at some point, return home to him. He had faith. That's an important part of this parable. The father has faith. He knows the son will come to his senses at some point and come back. And so the son is coming back. But before he even gets to the home, the father runs to him and embraces him. Now remember that, and I've said this many times, but if you haven't heard this before, an adult Jewish man didn't run. Unless they were going to be in battle and they were perhaps running towards the enemy or running away from the enemy, but they wouldn't just, they wouldn't just run for, that was undignified. Of all things, to be very undignified, to run towards, to run anywhere. They just wouldn't be seen doing it. That just didn't happen. That was a childish thing. Adult men didn't run in Jewish culture. So the fact that the father runs to the child, the son, not a child anymore, he's an adult, runs to the son, and guess what? The son has been living with the pigs. No doubt he's a little stinky because, the smell of pigs doesn't wash off easily. Dad don't care. Dad embraces him. He's unclean. I don't care. He's my son, and he's come home to me. He embraces him. And he, before the son even has it out of his mouth about his whole spiel that he's worked out on the way there, he's got this, you know how it works. You got this whole speech when you're trying to ask for forgiveness from your spouse or whoever, your mom or dad. You've got this whole speech worked out. And before he can even get started on that speech, really, he gets into it. Dad's, I want to hear it, basically. And he says to the slaves, go and get a robe, the best one. This is significant. And I'm going to skip over the ring for a minute and go and get sandals for him and put them on his feet. The robe signifies he's part of the family. The shoes signify he's no longer a slave, because the slaves went around barefoot. Family members, they weren't barefoot, at least not unless they were very poor. But here he's got slaves, he's got property. He's not a poor man. Puts shoes on his feet, signify he's a family member. He's not a slave. And then the ring. The important part of this, the most important part, I think, is the ring. The ring would be a signet ring, be the family crest. Put the ring on him. Give him back the family crest. He's restored to the family. And even more so, that ring means he represents the Father. This is my seal. This is what I seal things with. You are completely reconciled. It's as if you never left in the Father's eyes. It's as if you never betrayed my love for you by telling me you wished I was dead, that my stuff was more important than you, than my life. It's that insult is forgotten. Everything's forgotten. The Father's, he says, we celebrate the Son of mine that was dead is alive again. And that's all the Father cares about. Everything is forgotten. The injury, the insult, it's gone in the Father's eyes. And this is the importance of this parable, of this half of the parable, of the Son. Because the grace was there. Before the Son came home, the grace was there. The forgiveness was there, waiting for the Son to come home and realize that the Father had forgiven him long before he knew it. And I've told this story before, and I will tell it again. This is something that was driven home to me. Many of you know that I was married before, and my first wife and I, it wasn't a good breakup, and I was very bad to her. I apologize to God for that, but it was probably 20 years before I apologized to her for all of the wrongs that I had committed towards her and the evil that I had done towards her. And the most earth-shaking thing was when she replied back. It wasn't a face-to-face conversation; it was by email, or wasn't a conversation on the phone either. It was an email trans. And she said back to me when I told her, I forget, I apologized for all of that. She said, "Oh, well, I forgave you years ago." And that really changed a lot about how I understood God. To be honest, that little transaction, because I understood this parable so much better. The grace was there. The forgiveness was there. I had no idea. I'm still fretting over this, that certainly she must hate me for everything I did. And I would be justified. It would be totally justified. The Father would have been totally justified in hating the Son. The Father would have been totally justified to tell the Son, go to the slave quarters. You sleep on the raggedy old blanket over there. No shoes for you. You're going to be working. They don't have cattle because they're Jewish. You're going to be working the hardest jobs. We're going to give you double labor and half rations. This would be justice. This would be fair. But the Father's not just nor fair. And when people always say, people say, oh, God is just and God is fair. I say, no, he's not. Guess what? Thank God he's not just and he's not fair. Because if he was just and fair, we'd all be crispy. Because God's not fair. God's forgiving. God's about reconciliation. God's about restoration. He wants to be reconciled to his children. He wants his children reconciled to one another as well. That's the part where we got to work. And we said following Jesus was easy, or it was a walk in the park, because we're supposed to be trying to reconcile to each other as well as to God. But this is a story of reconciliation. This is a story of restoration. This is a story of the Father not caring about all this evil this Son heaped upon him by the disdain that he showed for the Father, by saying, I wish you were dead and I want your stuff. So the grace is there. That's the point. And the grace was there before the Son knew it. The Father had forgiven him long before that Son popped over the horizon on his way home. So the moral of the story is, come on home. God loves you. He's waiting for you. He's got the robe, he's got the ring, and the sandals are there. They're waiting for you. So with that, I'm going to let you go. That was a long one, but this is a very important parable. I love this parable so much. I'll see you Saturday morning, and we will continue on with the parable of the prodigal son. The second half with the older boy and the dad. That's not nearly as complicated or as long, as much quicker and easier. So we'll do that on Saturday. So with that, you have a blessed day, and please, please, please be a blessing to someone today. And we will see you Saturday. Bye bye.